Okay, it's 2 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And since we have some introductions, that'll give people a little bit more time to join us here in a minute. Okay. So welcome everyone. My name is Catlin Clay, and I'm the curator of exhibitions at the Art Museum of Southeast Texas in Beaumont, Texas. Welcome to the virtual panel discussion with the ROUX Collective. This panel discussion coincides with our new current exhibition, Delita Martin, Conjure, which is on view until Sunday, May 23rd of this year. We are currently open to the public with reduced hours. We are open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. and Saturdays, 11 to 4. We are closed on Sundays. We have safety precautions in place, as well as extra cleaning procedures, social distancing guidelines, and a mandatory mask policy for staff and visitors. So when you feel comfortable, we welcome you back to AMSET. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our Executive Director, Lynn Castle, and all of our AMSET staff, including our PR coordinator, Kaylee Thompson, our volunteers, interns, and also our board members and underwriters. This talk was made possible today through all of their efforts. This program was also made possible in part by a grant from Humanities Texas, the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. I would also like to thank our panel speakers, artists Rabéa Ballin, Ann Johnson, Delita Martin, and Lovie Olivia. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
So before we begin, I'd like to introduce the collective as a group and also the individual members. For any of our out-of-town viewers who may not be familiar with what roux is a mixture of flour and fat that, after being slowly cooked over low heat, is used to thicken mixtures such as soups and sauces. This dark, nutty flavored base is indispensable for specialties like gumbo, étouffée, and béchamel. And I know gumbo is very popular down here. We all love it so much. Anne is going to share her screen and show us a few images of the collective's work. In 2011, the collective was formed as part of the inaugural exhibition series, Print Houston. ROUX contributes to the discourse of contemporary printmaking by using traditional and experimental methods while highlighting the diverse art practices of its members. These 4 artists' works navigate between styles of the past and the proposed future and address experiences unique to women of color residing in the American South. Both Rabéa, Ann, Delita, and Lovie not only embrace and challenge drawing conventions in medium, surface, and concept, but also apply unusual approaches to the process and ingredients of printmaking. Identifying as installation, video, mixed media artists, sculptors, and painters as well, they make the common voyage once a year in the arena of printmaking. The 4 are intrinsically invested in a dialogue with print, pattern, and mark making, both two-dimensionally, as well as taking these marks, line, erasure, memory, and process off the page in order to flirt with 3-dimensional environment. From digital plaster fresco to traditional works on paper to more organic approaches like printing on feathers, glass, and fabric, their works summon an ingrained dialogue with the historical and formerly domestic spaces. The ROUX Collective has exhibited together over the last few years, and their most recent exhibition was in 2018 at the Prizer Arts and Letters Gallery in Austin. Previous exhibitions before that include, in 2017, their exhibition Salt at the Galveston Art Center. In 2015, Coal at the University Museum at Texas Southern University. Also, the exhibition Redefining Print in 2015, held in Houston. The 2014 exhibition Sugar from Blue Orange Contemporary Gallery. The 2013 exhibition Base at Art League Houston, as well as Moho, held at Prairie View A&M University. The exhibition Stir in 2012 at Gallery M Squared, and ROUX at Corridor Gallery, as well as exhibitions in 2011 at the Houston Museum of African American Culture and the University of Arkansas Little Rock.
Okay. The PowerPoint is doing its own thing. I do apologize. It's on rotation. I didn't mean it to be, but it is. So anyway, thank you everybody for coming. We are so excited to be here in support of our sister. We are clearly all sisters. Kathy Kaiser is on here and I'm so glad. We started an organization called Print Matters. 2008, 2009, we had our first exhibition. And one of the goals of that organization was to start a printmaking exhibition series that we called Print Houston. And I was the only Black member on the in the group at the time. And I wanted to make it my business that there was a Black presence in the Print Houston exhibition series. So Delita was the purest. I've known Delita longer than everyone. She was the purest printmaker that I knew at the time. She agreed to do it. I knew Lovie was doing some very cool experimenting, printing on plaster. And then Rabéa, I had known for years for her drawing skills, just a beautiful draftsman. And she gleefully and thankfully agreed to be a part of the group as well. And so our first exhibition was called ROUX. There's a longer story behind ROUX. It was an exhibition proposal that Lovie and I presented and we were not accepted. So we regrouped and then we started this exhibition called ROUX, and eventually, which is the collective that we are in now. Part of our ROUX is, one, we are all the youngest in our families. Two, we all have an affiliation with Project Row Houses. Three, we are all educators. And four, we are all daddy's girls. Every one of us are daddy's girls. And so we just had this natural energy, you know, between each of us. I am an experimental printmaker. I print on feathers and leaves and cotton. Lovie uses monotypes and monoprints on plaster. Delita has, we don't say master anymore, but is proficient in all levels of printmaking. And Rabéa has managed to transform her drawing, her beautiful drawing hand into prints. So these are images from our first two shows. Stir was our second show, which was at a former theater. And we were able to just kind of go into our corners and you could see the large space of it all. And it was just, we just gelled together. We just worked together well. I printed on vegetable paper in this show. Mm-hmm. Lovie did, I'm so sorry guys, it's a slideshow. Lovie did these peephole boxes. Delita did these posters at that time. And so Stir was our second show. And one of the things that I will share that is important to us is that we catalog every show. You can see the catalog right here for Stir, the catalog right here for ROUX. So it's important to us that we document because it's available. Self-publishing is available. Mm-hmm. Base?
Yes, I'll jump in on this one. Base was our third show, I believe. And what's so great about this one or something that kind of came together nicely was that it was in the space that the initial rejection of a ROUX exhibition was, but we love Art League Houston. Shout out to Jenny and Sarah Beth. They're supportive of all four of us. And so we were more than happy to kind of come home in a way to Art League Houston with our third iteration. One of the things that I love about working with all of the ladies is that we don't really discuss what we're making so much so. I mean, we have conversations, but we don't like force a theme or content. And some of the nice surprises that come out of that are this continuity in the way we experiment and play with things. And so what was starting to brew here a little bit was the idea of these circles that you'll see come up again in another exhibition. But we've got sort of, Lovie's unique way of working with plaster. and incorporating, you know, form and shape in a very sculptural way with printmaking. Here I am just playing with monoprints. And for Delita, we noticed sort of almost like this color explosion and the size of her work and also the level of her drawing. To me, I remember this show being very important. And I saw these amazing shifts that make me want to catch up with these ladies every time we show.
We was all slim and trim, Lovey. Look at us. All right, Sugar.
So Sugar was our first, like, I feel like first domestic space type show, a show that has several rooms, extremely multifaceted, ability to install and to show, because we had a number of walls and ceilings and lighting, and it had a hardwood floor and very, you know, sort of plastered walls. And we proposed this show at Blue Orange Gallery in Houston at the time. Shouts out to Megan Spacek, and I can't remember her brother right now, Troy Spacek, I believe. Okay. And this is, again, where Rabéa had mentioned the circles. So we hadn't spoken to each other for about a year when we did this exhibition. We were kind of like having phone calls and stuff, but we didn't see each other. And when we finally came together to start installing the work, we realized that this sphere, this sort of circle, was common in all of our work. And I think that the sphere is also common when we think about sugar. We think of these little round granules and things that sort of build up and compound and make and sort of make a larger mass of something. So yeah, this is work. Also, we saw Delita bringing lithos even further into her color fills and her color panels. I was pushing the plaster transfers, the plastic monoprints and monotypes to be a bit more abstract and starting to infuse a bit more color, whereas before it was just black and blue and white. I feel like we were all in sort of like a lull space. Like there's a lot going on.
Sugar was hard. Sugar was hard. I think we all had I know I had a total breakdown. I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
I think we all had a moment.
Yeah.
I will say about Delita, this is the first time that we saw the stitching.
Yes.
Yes.
I've been stitching, and like you were saying, the color was coming in more, and I think I was layering more of the processes. And I know at that time for me, it was really one of those moments where you're at the crossroad and you're like, am I traveling the right direction? Am I traveling the right road? So all of these things were bubbling up, I think, in all of our studios and all of our practices. And we kind of brought it together here.
Yeah, we added the sugar to the tea.
There you go.
To the lemonade.
Also, all of our titles are four words except base. And then they are all food related.
4 letters.
Yeah. And I love this because Delita can't stand this picture, but you know, I won't hold it up long because you hate it. But when we had Cole, and I'll let Delita talk about it, Cole was at Texas Southern University. So it was a homecoming for Delita. Dr. Wardlaw, who you know in Texas, is so important, particularly when it comes to African-American art. And that's her telling us to call her Alvia, and Delita and I are like, But Bea and I were diehard hip hop, so we thought it was kind of fun to recreate this album cover. So Delita hates this picture, but I love it because I think it's so cool. So I'm gonna put you out of your misery.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Don't leave me out the hip hop conversation.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lovie.
So Cole was a really, really important show I think for all of us, but really for me, because I was coming home. And we had made the decision, my family and I had made the decision to move back to Houston. And Dr. Wardlaw was so gracious and was like, you know, you're one of ours, you're coming home, we're rolling out the carpet for you. And it was just so amazing to have the support of my sisters. And on top of all of that, I'm bringing in these new elements into my work. There's more stitching, there's more layering, there's more printmaking processes. And to have that debut at home, you know, my home, was just tremendous for me. So I was really, really excited about that. So, and I really want to talk about the show from the perspective of these ladies are incredible, amazing artists, and they're always pushing the envelope. And I remember thinking to myself, I have to step up my game. And it's like Lovie comes in with this sculpture print, just, I don't know how to describe it. And it's like you're looking at it, but you don't realize what it is until it's photographed.
Yeah, you
until
can't
you take a
see
picture of it. So
it.
you can't see the word until you take a picture of it. And it just completely blows your mind. And Rabéa and her research skills and, you know, pulling imagery together and history together is like insane. And then Anne can print on anything. And I'm just like, okay, I got to step my game up with these ladies. But I love the fact that we work together, but we support each other, but we challenge each other the most. And I think Cole was a challenge for me. It was my sisters not only lifting me up, but challenging me to be better and to do better. So these are some images from Cole here, and also the cover of the Cole exhibition catalog.
The thing about Cole and the thing about us is that we don't trip on someone else's shine. We knew that Cole was Delita's homecoming, so she was Gladys and we were the Pips, and we were cool with that. You know, it was a huge space, the University Museum, and it was her space. We just dealt with the space we had, but we wanted to make sure she had her shine, because that was
so
her.
I think we literally like split the museum in half, and you guys took one half.
Yeah, we were on the periphery.
Right.
I was on the other half by myself, but you know, it was this joyous thing of us exhibiting together still.
Yeah. Kind of like this talk. I'm very thankful for being here, Delita. Thank you for inviting me. The show looks amazing. I forgot to say that at the top of the hour, but yeah, the show looks amazing.
Thank you, ladies.
I don't know who was down for Salt. I don't remember. So
I'm down for Salt. Salt is one of my favorite shows. I love Galveston. I love Galveston Art Center. I love the history of Galveston. When we came up with the title for this show, I was thinking about different literary artists that use salt as a metaphor often in their work. Like the Salt Eaters, Nair Raid's book Salt, and I thought that it was only appropriate to sort of use that as the term that we were going to use to drive us for this exhibition, because seawater. This is the second time that I started to fragment the prints that I was making at the time. So these pieces are in more fractal type shapes where they come together to make one form. I'm really interested in history, but I'm also interested in materiality and the way that I can take these materials that start off as like powder and then go into like a liquid, like a soup, and then turn into a hard material that can then be turned into an object, and that can just kind of keep expanding to as far as I can make it. Rabéa was printing these lithos on this paper. I forget what the paper is called because that's just not my medium, but
it was Mylar.
Mylar. Oh my God, the soft, supple texture of that Mylar with that ink sitting on top was amazing. Delita had expanded in size even further.
Yeah, and I think I started coming off the page more.
Yeah.
So the work becomes three-dimensional.
The panels started to float behind and in front of one another. And Anne had brought in her exhibition that she had previously done as a solo exhibition at Women in Their Works. And yeah, we have these little small spaces upstairs that we always take and turn into an environment that you can walk in, you can feel spirit, you can feel the history, you get a history lesson about African-American people, African-American women in this country, but also about printmaking and the possibilities of it and how the possibilities are endless. And every time we come together, it's always like, oh, we just keep pushing this printmaking. Like, what is printmaking at this point? Printmaking is pretty much a mark made, right? And a repetitive mark, and a mark that continues. And so I think that is sort of metaphoric in the way that we all work together. We're constantly laying down more marks and more steps and adding to this
We
process,
we keep pushing.
age-old process.
We continue to push the boundaries in printmaking. And two things I want to say about this, and I'll move on.
No, please.
One is, because this is Delita's weekend,
Yeah.
that print was in the film, the photograph,
Yes.
right? That film.
yeah.
I think we all kind of dropped a tear.
Sorry, Issa Rae
cried too.
and Lakeith.
My friend is in the movie, you know, my sister. And then the other thing is there's something to be said about the support from Houston. There was a caravan that came from Houston to see our show. I mean, it was emotional. It was what, about 25 people?
Yeah, probably just a caravan.
Traveled from Houston to Galveston just to see this show. So there's something to be said about the art community in Houston. Delita.
So this is we kind of like bring everything full circle back to ROUX. So I was invited to do an exhibition at the Prizer Arts and Letters Gallery. And I asked if I could bring my sisters in, and they were like, of course. And so it was really great, you know, us all coming together again. I was working with the plates, again, pushing the boundaries of printmakings, and the plates are also on exhibit now in Conjure exhibition as well at the AMSAT. And for me, the whole idea of repetition. So when I think about the plate installation, I think about it as a varied edition. So there's these portraits of women. It's an edition of portraits. The circular pattern is repeated over and over. The use of the lithography material, all the images are drawn using the litho crayon. So again, that to me is a 3D print. And Anne was working with candles and doing image transfers onto candles, which again, another printmaking process. And it was just this whole, it was just so visual, and everything was just coming off the wall. And Lovie was working with the plaster, and the images were abstract, right, Lovie?
Yeah.
That you were working with, and it was just so, I mean, it was such a powerful show. And Rabéa, I think we had your hair drawings. Is there an image of that, Ian?
The lithos on Mylar.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the lithos
in the corner. Yeah.
Yeah, the lithos on Mylar. So again, you know, coming together the way we came together the first time. So, and that was our last exhibit together.
So we are definitely due for a museum exhibition. I just put that in the universe. But it was a very intimate space.
Yes.
It was a small house.
Yes.
It made it was really for such
almost like a shotgun house.
Yeah, almost. Yeah, in Austin. Yeah. Rabéa, I'll let you talk about this show, then we'll quickly show what we are all into now. And I'm so horrified by I'm so anal about PowerPoints, and it's tricky right now, so I'll be okay. I'll be okay.
It's okay. I'll be brief. You know, Delita, although you don't have an artwork in this one per se, Delita's very much a part of this exhibition because it birthed out of an experience we all had surrounding the murder of Sandra Bland back home near Prairie View, and we were all away at Tougaloo College. You know, Delita was doing a workshop of printmaking. Did somebody say something?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Sorry. And yeah, so very briefly, Anne is putting on her curatorial hat here that we won't allow her to take off because she's so good at it. But incorporating not just ROUX members, but other women artists in a reaction to violence towards women. And it you know, it's very much a current theme, but this is going on, when was this, 2016, 2015?
Yes.
Still going.
Yeah,
2017.
still, so nothing has changed except for the location in which this exhibit is being shown. But again, we're reacting to the violence against women, and not just in the United States, and not just at the other hand of police brutality, but also in countries such as Mexico and Cuba. And so this is a very important exhibit that kind of had its rebirth in another location as well.
So what we're up to now, we are all kind of into some things. Then I'll pass this on to you, Caitlin. Just a couple of slides. Go ahead, Bea.
Oh yeah, so Ann and I, so one of the things is that we're all working artists outside of our ROUX Collective, and sometimes those overlap. Ann and I were in an exhibition right before COVID in San Antonio on colorism. And this is an image I used for that. During COVID, I started just collecting images. I work primarily with hair. The next slide, when you can get to it, Ann. Just documenting.
I had to get Bernie in there. I'm sorry, Bernie made an appearance.
Oh, Bernie! Well, of course, that's my studio. I had a visit with Bernie Sanders. You know, how could I not hop on that beam? I mean, if you know me, I'm a little sometimes social media butterfly. Currently not, but just documenting COVID hairstyles that came out of just quarantining and doing it sort of DIY hair. And very recently was exhibited downtown as part of Collective for the Culture, and was also in that show. And there you have it. And just very recently it became a mural. This is in the front of Lawndale. The subject matter is in passing, on racial passing. And this is part of Tierney Malone's long-term mural project at Lawndale. It's called the Sankofa Project, and we'll have a chance to do the mural, I think, in another year or so. Very, very proud of this one and the research that went into it. And that's what I'm currently doing right now.
Okay. And I'll just quickly, we are both in this show, Slowed and Throwed, at the Contemporary Arts Museum. FYI. I am an experimental printmaker, and I will print on just about anything except paper. I print, the piece on the left is actually in the Slowed and Throwed exhibition, which was odd to me. She wanted to have a Southern twist, and I have more works that are hip hop oriented, but she chose to show my cotton works, and I've been printing on cotton almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years this summer. The piece on the right is really, I literally just did that last week, just kind of experimenting with new printing plates. I was inspired, something I rarely do is print famous people, but I was inspired about what the work that Stacey Abrams has done. And that piece on the left is called The South Has Something to Say, and which is a hip hop lyric. But she talks about in her story about relatives and family members who had to pick cotton in Georgia. And I thought printing her on cotton using actual cotton bowls, there was a woman who actually picked cotton and gave it to me, was made for a very powerful piece. And it was intentional that background be red, because it has a lot to do with voter suppression. And then on the right side, and I think you allude to this in one of your questions, Caitlin, is the image of Mammy, who I always say she was the first supermodel because her image was everywhere. And my great-grandmothers were Mammies, and my great-great-grandmothers were Mammies. So I think the issue we have with Mammy is how she has been presented to us as, shiftless and cold black and these big red lips and not looking less than human. So I use her work quite a bit. And then this is a cotton comb that's used to pick cotton, and it has images of the two young girls printed on the back. Of course, being moved, what happened this summer happened this summer. It's not like it hasn't been happening. It's just that it's now being recorded. And so again, I remixed my candles, and these were collected in the Culture exhibition as well. And I give Robert Hodge credit to, I had these in a box. I didn't know how I would ever show these. And he arranged them so beautifully that there was a lot of love shown on those. And then I've been working on ironing boards as of late. So those are my latest pieces.
So I actually spent the last year and a half working with Conjure. It's been really amazing being able to self-reflect, which I kind of talked about last night. And out of that, thinking about humanity and prayer and meditation and how we come together as women and how we, hold our families in our spaces, in our spiritual spaces. So these are actually just a few works of mine. These were not works that were included in the exhibition. But the patterns that you see in the backgrounds, the patterns that you see in the current exhibition are what I call veilscapes. And the veilscape is the landscape for the spirit world. And the figures, when they move in and out of the patterns, that's how we interact in the spiritual world. That's how we navigate that space and become our spiritual selves or our spiritual other. And so that's what my work has been about. It's been an evolving conversation around women and spirituality. And so I also, during this time, everything has been so crazy. Sandra Bland and, just killings and it's been insane. So I was talking to my son in reference to how he felt about this time period and, what he was going through as a young man. Because as a mother, I'm afraid for him being a young Black man. And I felt like the conversation that we had really brought us closer because he got to understand me as a mother. I got to understand him as a young man and how he was perceiving the world and how he was navigating that space. And so I made a print of him and my niece here. This is my son, and my son loves hoodies. He's worn a hoodie all of his life since he was able to choose what he wanted to wear. He would put on a hoodie. And I remember him in high school, them calling me on the phone saying that he can't wear a hoodie to school. And I was like, it's an article of clothing. And so in this picture, I decided to put him on his hoodie. And I asked him, if your hoodie could say one thing, what would you say? And he said, let me breathe. And he wasn't asking for permission for something that he should have the natural right to do, but he made a definitive statement. And I thought that was so powerful. Well, we started getting lots of calls and inquiries about the piece. And I was like, I'm sorry, it's not for sale. This is a gift to my son. And, hopefully, he'll pass it down to his children and he can talk to them about what we are going through today. And so, we got so many calls and he said, well, Mom, why don't we make some prints and make them available? And I was like, well, okay. And, at this point, I'm a little leery, 17-year-old wants to sell prints. What you going to do with it? But he wanted to donate the money to a cause. And so we talked about it, we researched, and we couldn't find anything that we were really interested in, that we wanted to donate to, or any organization. So we decided that we would create our own organization, that we would be the change that we wanted to see. And one of the things that we were noticing was that during this time, all of this violence and political strife that was happening, artists were online and you could see their voices. You could see their voices and hear their voices through their work. And that was very powerful. It's just been a powerful movement. Artists have used the tools that they had available to them to create work towards change. And I wanted to be in a position to help those artists to get their voices heard. So we created the Artist Activism Fund. We sold prints of my nephew and my niece to raise those funds, and we chose we had a jury competition, and the entries sent in proposals, and Rashawn Rucker and Nastasia Swift were selected as our first artist activism grant winners for 2021. And so I'm very
$5,000 each.
$5,000 award to each artist toward an exhibition. So what's really wonderful about this project is that we are partnering with other exhibition spaces and organizations who will host these artists in their exhibitions that we're partially funding. So we're very excited about the relationships that we're building with other organizations. We're excited about this bridge that we're essentially building between artists and galleries, artists and museums, and artists and other organizations that exhibit artists' work. So that's what I'm up to.
Lovie?
So these fall, I'll go through this quick because I'm like still holding on to what Delita just said. Is so awesome, so strong. I've been making these profiles, is what I call them, for about 12 years now. They've gone from pretty simple monochromatic to slightly more colorful. They are made up of notes, sketches, ideas, writings, and things over the past few years that are directly from my journals, sketch pads, notebooks. And then I paint on these sheets of paper, and I layer them, and I print on them, and I create textures and patterns until I have something that I love. And they're then placed in shadow boxes, and this is how they're sold. And this just sort of furthers my conversation about how I'm interested in the subject becoming an object as well. Like a painting is a two-dimensional thing, but once you take it outside of the frame and add some dimension to it, it then becomes a sculptural object. And that's sort of where I'm constantly seesawing, somewhere between painting, printmaking, sculpture. So yeah, and then my paintings are, as I mentioned earlier, secco fresco. So there's layers and layers of plaster applied to a surface, and then that surface is then carved and manipulated and investigated. Sort of like an archaeologist would dig. I dig through these materials that I've layered, and at the end of it, create paintings on top of those. So they become sort of these objects like wall panels that you can almost remove. So yeah, lots of history and texture and depth in those. Lately, I've been in studio. I finally am in a space where I'm painting again because, the last year has been rough. Throughout the last year, I have been surviving through grants provided by arts organizations that are interested in fusing culinary arts and visual arts. And so for the last 2 years, my life partner and I have been involved in these cultural dinners and conversations and dialogue that uses food as a vehicle to get conversations started across culture, across gender, across age, across sexuality. We're called Two Dykes and a Knife. We actually have been funded by Diverse Works for a couple of projects. One of them is happening tomorrow. We'll be putting all that online. I'll let everybody know where you can catch those videos and those performances, because that's what we're doing. We're performing food and dinners. And then in the middle of everything last summer, the Station Museum of Houston asked me to get involved with a mural. So I created this mural. It's called Bloom for Real. sort of playing with this idea of like not just saying you are a part of a movement, but you're actually in part of that movement, growing with that movement, creating your own movements and blooming and growing. And along with that idea of Bloom for Real, we are going to use ammunition boxes and planters to create sustainable living and food around all of the murals at the station. Eventually got artists to create, so we can, it's allowing or witnessing a seed be planted and grow into an idea. So again, metaphorically blooming. And I think that's it.
That is it for that. Thank you for being patient with us.
Yeah,
You enjoyed our imagery.
look at all these folks here.
Awesome.
And we'll turn this over to Catlin.
So that was wonderful. I love seeing everything that y'all have been working on lately. You're very busy. And my first question is going to delve into a little bit of something you've touched on over your discussions of your exhibitions. So I know you all work in many different types of mediums, you're interdisciplinary artists, but one of your common practices is printmaking. And what sort of originally drew you each to printmaking, and what continues to excite you about printmaking? I love seeing the experimental ways that you're using printmaking. So if you could tell us all a little bit about that, that'd be great.
For me, I was afraid of printmaking when I was in school. I was
really?
terrified. My only memory of printmaking undergrad was acid, and I don't like acid and etching, and I was terrified. But Lauren Kelly, she's younger than me, but she is a mentor. When I was in grad school, they didn't know where to put me because my work is kind of all over the place. And at the time, interdisciplinary studies was not a major. So she said, go with printmaking, learn a skill. And I just kind of fell in love with the non-toxic process of photopolymer printmaking, but I did not fall in love with editioning. To this day, I just won't do it. I don't like paper. And so I print on corn husk and feathers and cotton and anything but paper. But I enjoy pushing the boundaries of the very family of printmaking.
I personally felt like I had done everything that I could possibly do with drawing, which was absolutely not true, false in every context of the world, but that's how I felt. And so printmaking was a natural next step for me, because printmaking for me is an extension of drawing. I'm replacing the pencil with a knife. I'm replacing, the pencil with a litho crayon. So I'm replacing paper with a metal plate or a piece of wood. So it for me, it's pushing the boundaries of drawing, which is my first love. And then once I started, there was this excitement that happens with printmaking. And I think for me, I use so many different processes in my work, and each process does something different for me from an emotional connection standpoint. And printmaking is that excitement, that energy that happens. You never know what you're going to get. You're having to problem solve, and all this, so many things are happening all at the same time. And I enjoy that part of printmaking.
For me, I probably made my first print in 10th grade. I went to the prestigious High School for Performing and Visual Arts in Houston, Texas. That was my last formal arts education. I am autodidactic by choice and by ambition. I love the way that the accidents happen in printmaking and the mark that is left. I love the fluidity of ink, and especially with monotype and monoprint, the way you remove one material from the next and then leave sort of this puddle and this flow and liquidity. So I'm very interested in printmaking for the way the material feels, but also the mark that it makes, and also the fact that I can repeat something. Like I can constantly, if I want to, repeat an image. So that's sort of my design background. I'm like really into patterns. And so printmaking allows that to happen. And as far as my paintings go, I use actually printmaking blades to cut back into the plaster. So almost like a linoleum plate. So all the paintings actually have texture to them, and you can actually lay a surface on top and put ink or rub for Taj and still get an image. So it's just constantly like allowing something to live over and over again and repeating itself is what drew me to printmaking, and something I'm like extremely interested in.
Yeah, similar thoughts to you, Lovie. I love the idea of the additions, actually, and I love working on paper. So I was introduced to printmaking in undergrad, and I thought I actually wanted to pursue printmaking, and I applied to LSU for my printmaking MFA, and I got rejected. And it was one of those rejections where it stopped me from doing something because I thought I just wasn't good at it. So years later, when Anne approached me and asked me to be part of the collective, it took a couple of conversations for me to commit, but I'm so glad that I did, because now it's just like every summer, going into, I want to play with a new and different process. And I want to shout out Burning Bones Press. And I know, Kathy, you were here. You were such a huge influence on my first lithographic pronto plate lithography exhibit that I did. It was one of our earlier ones, and they've always been such a welcoming house. And Eric Pierce as well, to help me do the printing, because all of that takes equipment that I don't have at home. So that's, I just love the different processes involved, and also the history of printmaking is something that I'm super interested in.
That's fantastic. I do have a follow-up question for you, Anne. Is it very difficult to print on the cotton? Could you explain to our viewers a little bit about how that process might work?
So this is what had happened. So I went to the Southern Graphics Conference in the night that we opened the show in Texas A&M. So that was 2019. And I met Allison Sarr. And I'm convinced in my mind that I am the fourth Betty Sarr daughter. I'm her fourth daughter. I'm just convinced in my mind. And I touched a hand, and I haven't been right since. So when I saw her work, I didn't expect to see her sculptures. And her sculptures included a lot of natural cotton, real cotton bowls, not cotton balls. And I thought, wow, maybe I should try that. I haven't tried that yet. And so it was some trial and error, but I managed to get it to work. So literally, I just have a bag of raw cotton, and I just spritz it a little bit and just put it on top of my printing plate. Then I could run it through the press. I had to figure out how much water to put on it, because if I spray it so that it's fairly damp, it's easier to lift off the plate. But when it dries, the image puffs up. If I barely spritz it, the image is great, but it might stick to the plate. So there's a lot of trial and error in it, but it has a direct association with slavery. Absolutely. I mean, that connection, it's in your face and it's there. So yeah, I still have a lot of trial and error with it. I mean, the Stacey Abrams just happened to come out because I told Delita the day before, my printmaking life is over. I can't put these printing plates to work. Yeah. It's a wrap. I'm done. It's, and then I figured it out. So it is a very, of all the processes I use with leaves and feathers, cotton is the most challenging.
And it's interesting that you bring up that your journey into printing on cotton was determined by seeing other artwork. My next question for the collective members is, could you each tell us about a time when a certain artist or artwork left a major impact on you? And did this impact your art making or just your thought process?
Well, for me, recently, I mean, I love all things Betty Sarr, but seeing Allison Sarr that spring really, just seeing her work in person. It's one thing to see stuff in books, but when you see an artist that you love in person, it has a tremendous impact. And the fact that I fanned out and was able to meet her and then see the work, but prior to that, it was her mother but meeting her, you know, so I would say Allison and Betty Saar for me.
I grew up under the John T. Biggers teaching philosophy. My father studied under Dr. Biggers, and so, you know, at home teaching me to draw, he followed very much his philosophy. And then I come home from school one day, my dad's like, get your drawings together, and I have this pitiful two poster boards taped together, and I stuffed my drawings in there. I had no idea where we were going. Well, we drove to Houston, and Dr. Biggers looked at my work. And for me, that was a moment of just confirmation that you are an artist. This is what you're going to do. And so he was a huge influence on me being able to see my mother, my grandmother, and the women in my community who wore head rags, who, you know, still had their wash pots, who did domestic work, to be able to see them as the queens that they are, to see them as these beautiful spirits. So that was the impact that he had on me. Later on, I was introduced to the work of Elizabeth Catlin. And that was life-changing for me, because I saw this amazing woman in this mark making, that she could wield a carving knife like nobody's business. And her lithographs were just beautiful. Her mark making was incredible. And so to see a woman make these beautiful images of women and children, and, you know, and talk about political things in her work, that was inspiring to me as a printmaker. So I look at Elizabeth Catlin in terms of her mark making, in terms of her printmaking, and I look at John Biggers from the standpoint of this whole magical philosophy that he had. He taught me how to see art, because there's one thing to look at art and look at life, but there's another thing to see it. He taught me how to see, and Elizabeth taught me how to be very expressive in my mark making. And I also was able to meet her as well.
For me, my first response to a work of art emotionally was a play called Porgy and Bess. I was 9 years old and I cried. Secondly, it's going to be John Biggers for his intricate detail, his pattern making, his ability, depth of field. Like, we can go on forever about the way this man had time, right? Like, today we don't have that time anymore. I realize that very few of us artists, whether we are technically inclined or not, we don't have the time. It just doesn't exist. And so I think we're figuring out ways and figuring out how to move around and speed up our processes. I think printmaking is good for that. And then it's going to be Barbara Chase Rabu for conceptual approach and materiality. And then, man, it's hard. There's so many in between and before. Elizabeth Catlin, of course, and Carrie James Marshall.
Yeah, it's kind of a hard question to answer, right? Because
Right.
We do so many different things and different people inspire. But if I had to narrow down to one person that really impacted me, it would be James Van Der Zee and his photographs. And the reason is because I didn't have any idea who he was. And I was already exiting my 4 years in college when I just randomly, I was in Portland visiting my brother, and I went to the library for the day, and I just walked around and I just randomly grabbed the book. It was James Van Der Zee's photographs, of course, documenting the Harlem Renaissance. And I was just appalled that I had never seen his work, not in a textbook, not in conversation, not in art history classes. And that's what prompted me to look for other histories that I would describe as being hidden. And that's kind of where I get my initiative to continue to research and tell stories that I feel like have not been given representation. So James Van Der Zee for me.
That's great. It sounds like you've all been really inspired. by many different artists who have had quite the impact on your art making, even up to now. And going a little bit beyond individuals in the art world, is there a particular social moment or cultural shift recently that you say has been most influential in impacting you and your work? And I know there's been a lot going on, so it may be, not necessarily one thing in particular.
Well, Rabéa alluded to us being in Tougaloo, Mississippi, of all places, Tougaloo, Mississippi. And we were there for the Tougaloo Art Colony, and there were artist talks every day. And this is the moment that they're cutting my grass. I'm so sorry if you hear that. But a friend of ours, Frank, was giving his talk. He stopped in the middle of his talk and he looked at me and he said, "Ann, what is going on at Prairie View?" I've been teaching at Prairie View for over 20 years. And he was referring to the Sandra Bland situation. And I didn't at the time know what was going on because I was disconnected. And then when we got back to Houston, and I was like, oh my God, this is my campus. And to this day, I have not been able to stop at the memorial they have for her on campus. And this happened in 2015. But something about 2015 was just crazy. And again, it's not like these things have not been happening. We've been talking about this for years, but it's on video now. Now you can see it. And right around Cole, my work really started to shift towards creative activism. And I mean, I was born an activist. My father was a deep activist. And but it's really started to show through in my work starting in 2015. And, not just because of what happened to Sandra Bland, but I was so connected to her because I would have been her coworker. She worked with freshmen, I would have worked with her. And so, and she was pulled over for a blinker, it brings in a whole issue of double consciousness. We have to see ourselves through the eyes of others just to live. And so, a lot of that sparks my work.
Mm-hmm. For me, it was Ahmaud Arbery, and that really resonated with me because my son is a runner and he runs every single day. He loves it. And I think we may be one of 3 Black families that live in my neighborhood. We're in a very rural area. It's not uncommon for my neighbors to have their Confederate flags out. And that frightens me because I don't know if he's going to come home. But it's like, how do I teach him to be a productive, caring citizen, an upstanding citizen, but also have him understand that damn near every moment of the day he's in danger and not be a bitter person. And so there's that conflict that's happening there. So that for me really started me to really thinking. And when I look back, I think it started long before the drawing of him in the foundation and all of those things. But that moment really struck me as really sad, just a real scary time for me, as a mom, and to see my child love something so much. And what I found really interesting was him and his friends, that generation, they don't understand racism in the way that we, being born in the 70s and the 60s, understood, and earlier understand racism to be. And for him and his friends, it just absolutely doesn't exist. And I remember having a conversation with him, at 5, and explaining to him about the color of his skin. And he's like, what are you talking about? And that's a good thing, because you're like, maybe we're heading in the right direction. But on the other hand, that's a scary thing, because he could be in a dangerous situation and not recognize it. And so having that conversation with him, when we created that work together, was a powerful moment again for me, because I got to understand where he was, what he was thinking and how he was thinking about navigating this space. And he got to understand me, not as a crazy paranoid mom who was just fussing over him, but he got to understand what my fear, where my fear was really rooted.
Yeah. Me, I sort of reside at the intersection of many different identities. I'm a woman, I'm Black, I'm Southern, I'm queer, I'm in a relationship with a South Asian woman. All these things sort of have, these sort of intersections of my identity have always been the place in which I impulsively make and create, because I think those identities hold a lot of emotion, and I get the best work out of that emotion. So it has been the uprise of last summer, but it has been all the movements. It has been, trans and queer rights constantly challenged throughout the decades. It has been all these things. And so I'm kind of exhausted. I'm tired, and the work I'm making now, outside of the work that's sort of in exhibitions around the country, is a show that I'm just calling In Defense of Pleasure. And, the idea of making work from a place that does not require that sort of turmoil or that struggle, work that I think is beautiful, work that I think feels good, work that I enjoy making, and not having the responsibility of constantly unpacking, because that could be so heavy right now. And in a time when the world is sort of still and sort of in between quiet and loud, like, I think it's the best time to make that work for myself and see what comes out of just purely the kid that laid in the bed looking out the window, drawing in their sketchbook, and making pleasurable work and pleasurable materials. And pleasure is a very broad term, but I'm reading Adrienne Marie Brown and Audre Lorde, and sort of using literature to trigger these new ideas, or ideas that have been sort of suppressed.
And for me, it takes its toll, internalizing the pain that you see in all the communities around you being just hit so heavily based on things that, religion, skin color, gender, just identities, just for living. And so it takes its toll. So what I've learned and what I've taken, I can't give you one specific incident that like triggered something specific for me, other than me reassessing the importance of what I'm making, how I'm making it, and staying true to myself, like not being reactionary, like really stepping back out of that group think mentality, so that I'm always going to do something that is genuinely a response that I can give, all of me into, and reassessing what activism is and how there are so many different forms of it. Not everyone is a frontline protester. Not everyone is physically able to do that. But there are so many ways that you can participate in activism and still stay true to yourself. And for me, art making and documenting and educating my students about important situations that they may not have access to through media or otherwise, that's it's triggered a more heightened sensitivity to all of that.
And I do want to say, Lovie and Rabéa both spoke of the weight. That weight is heavy. That's one of the reasons why I curated the show, How Do I Say Her Name? Because it was so frustrating. The weight was so heavy, and I didn't know how to get that out. Am I the only one that's feeling this way? And a very close friend said, use your creativity as your activism, because as Rabéa said, everybody ain't built for the streets. And with that show, it was very conceptual, but Monica Villarreal did this wonderful mural that allowed people to write those expressions on the wall. So they were physically interactive within the exhibition. And so all of these things that we have talked about, it turns out that a lot of artists were feeling this same way. And we were able to kind of get that out through that exhibition.
And these are the types of things that Black Box Press Foundation wants to support. And that's one of the reasons why I started the organization, because I understand as a young artist, having emotions, having feelings, wanting to talk about something specific in my work or something in particular, and not being able to find that audience or, you know, find the support that I need. And I want very much to be the support that these artists need, if I can in any way, to make sure that their voices can be heard. Because again, you know, art can change minds and hearts, and minds can change systems, and systems can change lives. And that's what the organization is about.
And Rabéa, I really liked your use of the word reassessment. I think society right now is really being called to reassess a lot of different elements of our systems, of the individuals within our society, how we view each other and speak with each other and interact with one another. And we're definitely living in a time where we're reassessing and reevaluating how we depict one another, how we historically think about the narratives of our country and our peoples. And Delita, you spoke about your foundation, and I know from what you've said that for you, that's a major way to bring about change for young artists and also just for viewers in general. But if you all would also like to talk about how you wish your art to bring about change, and I'll combine that sort of with what message do you want people to walk away with after they viewed your work, maybe individually as like a sole artist or collectively as a group?
One thing I always say about, which I teach my students, is don't look at a work of art, look into it. Don't look at it, look into it. It's not always our responsibility to make the change. You know, we can spark change, or we can spark a conversation, and everybody's going to see things differently. I mean, I love the piece that I did with Stacey Abrams. There's somebody else on the other side who can't stand her and can't see past that image of her. So again, that's a heavy weight, because who knows what changes who, where, why, and whom. So, you know, again, in terms of the viewer, everybody's going to see something different. So that's nothing I can personally control. I can have intentions when I create something, but that doesn't mean that the viewer is going to receive it that way.
Right.
When I think about art, because I'm asked the question a lot, like, what is the responsibility of the artist? What do you think your responsibility is? When I think about that and the perception that people have of my work, my responsibility, I feel like, is to be true to myself as an artist, and to put out work that I believe in. And what I really want people to take from it, particularly young artists and emerging artists and people who are interested, because I get a lot of, emails and calls and have conversations with people who want to be artists. They're like, oh, you know, you're actually living and working as an artist. I want them to understand the possibilities of living and working as an artist. Realizing that it can be done. And I think one of the most powerful things that my parents could have possibly ever done for me was identify me as an artist at the tender age of like 5. They would literally introduce me, oh, this is my baby daughter and she's an artist. And that seed blossom helped me to bloom into what I am today. You know, as a full-time artist. So, you know, my work is about possibilities. It's about dreams. It's about my truth. And so, and that's what I kind of hope people will take away from my work.
One of my quotes from like an old artist statement was, my wish is to communicate in a language that is more tangible than thought. So it's like my urge to layer and allow so many things to come and go within the piece, I think is my desire to communicate with my viewer and to sort of get them to investigate. I think that my process, even in making the work, is investigative, and I think I'm inviting the viewer in to sort of do that. So I use a lot of symbolism, familiar things that we see, signifiers, to sort of draw the viewer in, and then maybe there's a trigger, and then maybe from there comes a conversation. But I think it's always a seduction. There's always like, let me get you over here to talk, to look at something, to peer into it. And that's just my love for aesthetics as well. You know, the way the material presents itself to a viewer, shiny, dull, glittery, flat, you know, all those things sort of in play and in concert with one another, is my intention when making the work. And then what it does once it's out into the world, whether I wish it to be one way or another, I really can't control what happens to it. But I think it starts with like a history lesson, and then those aesthetics that sort of support that history lesson.
Wow, Lovey, I love following you today because you're saying all the words that's on my heart. Like when you said history lesson, you know, as a historian, I study artifacts. I have to look back at what people have left behind visually, you know, not always what's written. So a word that I've just really fallen in love with is the word portal, and considering my work as portals into a story. And if you can look at my imagery, which a lot of images don't exist for, you know, histories out there, as a portal to start a discussion and possibly break down some barriers for you, then that's what I've dedicated my work to continuing doing. I tell my students, where Anne says, don't look at it, look into it. I always say, prove that you are alive every day, make something. Someone's gonna dig it up. You know, Lovie, you love archaeology too, like the whole digging and unearthing process is so important. And it's up to us as artists to leave things responsibly behind if we so choose.
Yeah.
And Lovie and Rabéa, you bring up a really interesting concept about like archaeology and finding stories and sharing them of historical people with contemporary viewers. And there's been a lot of discussion lately in the news and in art institutions and organizations about how can we more accurately and respectfully tell the stories of African American people who have been, you know, maybe traditionally left out of the social narrative in art, but also in terms of accomplishments and society's history as a whole. Do each of you have maybe a thought about how we could do better in that area?
The work needs to be seen, you know, as it relates to art. There's great work out there that's in the shadows. There's a wonderful documentary on HBO right now about African-American artists, and what a big deal it was for David Driscoll to have this exhibition of these masterpieces that nobody knew about because they have not had the opportunity to be seen. That's one way that would help. And we have to understand the context of imagery. Artists, I love Michael Ray Charles, uses very derogatory images, but people look at his work and not into it. They can't hear what he's saying because they're so frustrated by those images. What is the context of that imagery, and how and who and why how did we get past it? And, you know, and that's why I get this from Betty Saar as well. This is why you're going to see Mammy in her work, and you're going to see Mammy in my work, because Mammy is a whole lot of people's grandmothers and great grandmothers. And she was enduring, and that woman had to take care of somebody else's family before she could take care of hers. She's a supermodel, she's a superhero. So we get upset by the way she's presented to us. We don't like the way that she's presented, dehumanized, but she is such a superhero and powerful figure. So we need to give the proper life and respect to that imagery.
To kind of piggyback off of Anne a little bit, the women in my work, I'm often, particularly the earlier works, I was questioned, about these women because they were very domestic in nature. And for me, it's very important as a Black woman to tell my own history and to show how I look visually and not be seen through the eyes of others, to present how I look. And so it's important for us to tell our own stories, and as well as, there's going to have to be this partnership with institutions to get those stories out there. And it's important for those stories to be seen. I weave personal history all through my work. The stitching in my work was something my grandmother taught me. The jars in my work are very important because my grandmother used to keep these jars on her dressers, and she kept bottles and pins and trinkets in them. And all of those things had a story about the personal history. My great-grandfather's buttons that he had on his uniform that were kept. There were little slivers of fabric that was kept from the nightgown that the night my sister caught fire in front of the heater, my grandmother kept a little swatch of the gown. So all of these family stories and histories are wove into these objects, and I bring these objects into my work to tell these stories. And I stitch all of that history into the work to share with the viewer. And it's important that artists understand that their stories, their histories, their documentation of the world around them is extremely important. And we have to make sure that work gets seen.
I'll piggyback off of that with a similar ambition to sort of reflect African-American people in this country, but also to elevate the lost history of queer African-American people in this country. There hasn't been a major movement started in this country without the work and help, seeds and backbone of queer Black people. When we talk about James Baldwin, Octavia Butler, Audre Lorde, Barbara Smith, Angela Davis, all of these literary artists that sort of are all the quotes we see nowadays on like the internet when there's a movement, all these quotes, that we sort of take and constantly repost and cycle through our social media. Much of that has a lot to do with the work that queer African-American people did. And I can't imagine, with the struggle that I have today as who I am, I can't imagine the struggle that they had during their time. But also what's so beautiful about that moment is that we're watching these seeds sort of grow and bloom into the things and the technologies left behind by these folks that we have to sort of get through this. It's gonna require these folks sort of impulses and ideas of that time to get us through the moment that we're in. And so I'm constantly trying to remind people, don't quote James Baldwin if you have a problem with queer Black men. Don't quote Audre Lorde if you have a problem with queer Black women. Don't quote, like you can't decide to follow such great abolition and not understand that they were also queer. And so there's not a piece of work that I do that does not include one or more of those people in it. So
I want to respond, but as I was driving, I completely missed the question and half of Anne's response. But hearing everyone's comments, I think I know the questions about the responsibility of like putting stories and providing Is that what it is? Visibility to the stories and the responsibilities? Well, I think a lot of it's already been, said, is like, if we're making authentic stories, the other half of the responsibility is for people to read those stories. And, the maker is only going to make them, and then the viewer takes that and learns from it, or is interested in it and reads about it. Like, love what you said about Baldwin. It's important. Like, that's that whole group think mentality thing that I was mentioning earlier, and to really do my research and to bring representation also to people that don't appear whatever it is, monoracial, or mono feminine. That whole idea with you having to look exactly like what it is you feel or are inside, that space of otherness or intersectionality is another term that we use a lot. Just exploring that space and putting some documentation to it so that everyone's story can be told.
And I'd also want to add to that, the exhibition Conjure is huge. To be able to have the stories of my mothers and my foremothers and the women that I've quarantined with and I've shared the sisterhood with, to have our stories in a major museum out there, that you guys are part of that puzzle. You are a part of that solution in being able to get these stories out there and to have us have the visibility that's needed for people to learn, for the viewer to have the option of viewing this work.
Yeah, the institutions have to do their work. They have to do their work. You see all these major museums selling certain collections so that they can reinvest in work by women artists and things like that. The institutions have to get on the ground and do the legwork as well.
And I love too that you all brought up the point of the responsibility of the viewer. So, once the work is made and when the institution shows it, it's also part of the viewer's responsibility to, like you said previously in the discussion, just not look at the art, but to look through it and try to truly understand what is being said and what the artist's intention is and the narrative that is being presented to them. And I'd like to wrap up with just one final question, and it's a little bit lighter than maybe the ones we've discussed, but what advice would you give to new artists that are trying to break into the art world?
I'll give you a light answer.
Okay.
It's all light.
You have to fight. I mean, you have to stand, you have to stand, you're gonna get rejection and you're just gonna have to fight through that. Be professional, have good pictures. You have to learn how to write and just be persistent.
Do the work. Make good artwork. Do the work. You can't, you're not an artist without art. Whatever that may be, whatever form that might take, you have to do the work. I can't even tell you how many students I've talked to that want to be artists, and you say, okay, well, where's your portfolio? And
they pull out their phone.
there's no work, or there's 2 items there. You have to do the work.
What I've learned from students is they think because they get 300 likes on a sketch that they're artists. No, sweetie, you're not. So it takes work.
Yeah.
I always tell my students this: be honest, be genuine. There's only one you. We can be inspired by other artists, but the major goal is to find yourself through that artist if you need to be inspired by them. But yeah, be honest. And, aesthetics range. It's a broad spectrum. But if you're honest, then at least there's a story there.
Yeah, and for me, I'm just going to give the most practical advice that I can, and to add to what you guys mentioned about making the work. But document your work really well. Have a really well-written bio and a really well-written artist statement. And part of that is taking a very serious look at yourself and what your work is about. And once you have that together, then start looking for spaces that you would like to get into. But that does take a lot of work. You have to really understand your local arts community, know the spaces, because you're just going to fail if you aspire to a space that is not the best fit for your work.
Right.
There's, and it doesn't mean that your work isn't amazing, but the space is not for that. Those are some practical lessons that I've learned along the way, but I can tell you, honestly, I would be nowhere without my artist community. So many opportunities have been given me simply because somebody knows me and they ask. And you can't get that unless you be visible. It is a part of it. But when you have genuine friends like us, that's built over time and a lot of investment, we can pull each other in. And if you're really a genuine person, you want to pull in the younger generation because the elders have pulled us in. But you got to be around.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely agree. And I, just to add to it, think sort of going off of all your answers, just sort of having this general thoughtfulness when you're an artist. I've run into so many students who don't know how they want to present their work, or they're not really sure why they like a particular artist that they're inspired by. And so, having this thoughtfulness that goes into your practice that really helps genuinely create your narrative and your story as an artist. But this has been such a wonderful talk. Thank you all for being here. If anyone who is joining us virtually would like to ask a quick question, you're welcome to type it in our chat box. We're going to try and wrap up in the next few minutes, so we might take just 1 or 2 questions. But this talk will be available on the museum's website and on our social media posts or pages, excuse me. So if you'd like to come back and view it again, you're more than welcome to. And you can also email me at the museum. My email is cclay@amset.org if you have any questions for the speakers. And I know, Anne, you had that one PowerPoint slide at the beginning of the presentation that had the collective's contact information.
I can share that again.
Okay.
Let's see. This one?
Yes.
Okay.
So you see their websites here. All 4 of them have contact pages on their websites, so you can reach out to them directly if you come up with a question or want to reach out to them about the panel discussion. I'm not seeing any questions in our chat, so we'll let everyone think about the conversation. And I just want to thank the ROUX Collective members again. Delita,
Thank y'all. Thank you, Delita.
Thank you,
Thank
Delita.
you, guys.
Congratulations, sis.
Thanks, guys, for the support. Love you guys.
Always.
Love you guys too. Thank you for having us.
Love you
Y'all,
guys.
y'all did a fantastic job. Very well prepared, very well executed, and fantastic panel.
Oh, thank you.
So much.
Okay, so we'll be signing off now. Everyone have a good rest of your weekend, and thank you again for joining us.
All right, thank
Thank
you. Be well.
You're welcome.